In this video, you will learn MongoDB, Express, React, and Node.js. We will be using CRUD operations to manage the database from the front end. So the create operation, the read operation, update operation, and the delete operation. Along with that, we will also be having some unit tests with Jest and React testing library. This is the final build. We will be able to add to this. So we can add to-dos, we can update to-dos. So if we click on the to-do, it then crosses it out and it sends an update response back to the API to say that we have completed this to-do. And if we click on close, we will also delete the to-do. So this is all to come in this video. Okay, so first off, I'm going to create the React portion of the app, so the front end. So if I open my terminal, and I'm currently in the correct folder, so now I want to create the front end folder. So I'm going to create a React app. So if we use npx create React app, I'm going to name this to do front end. So this will create the front end of our application, so the React part of it. This is where we also will create the UI as well. Okay, so now that we have the front end, I'm just going to cd into my front end. So it's cd to do front end, like so, and then npm start to start my application. So now we should load on the local host here on the left, which we have got. So if I expand into my to-do front end and into source, I now have a bunch of files on here that I will edit so that we have a clean start. So if I go into my app.js, everything within the header, I'm just going to delete, and I'm just going to give a h1, welcome to the to-do app, like so. I'm going to also remove the logo as we don't need it anymore. And now if I save, we now have the welcome to the to-do app. I'm also going to clean up the app CSS file, so everything in here is not required anymore. And in my app, I'm going to add some CSS in there. So I'll give it a margin of 0 and also a padding of 0 so that everything aligns to the left. So now it has done. If I go back into my app folder now, I now want to create a to-do app. So first off, I'm going to create a folder structure. So within my source folder, I'm going to create a folder called assets for all of my images that I'm going to add into my app on here. I'm also going to create a components folder. So where I will create my reusable components, that's where everything will go. So components. So first off, the first component that I want to create is the to-do component. So if I open my new folder in the components folder, and I'm going to just call this to-do, and within here I'm going to have an index.js file and also a styles.js file. This is where I'm going to install styled component to handle my CSS. So if I create a new terminal and I cd into the front end, so cd to do front end, and in here I'm going to add a npm package, npm I styled components, like so, and press enter. So whilst that's importing, I'm just going to switch back to my other terminal. I now have the app styled, and now I want to create a to-do component. So if I use my React functional snippets and I type in rfce, this will create a functional component for myself. I'm going to name this one to-do. So hello, this is the to-do component, like so. And now if I save and go into my app.js, I'm now going to import the to-do component, like so, and close in brackets as well. And now if I save that, I now have hello, this is the to-do component. So what we are going to do is within the to-do component, we are going to have smaller components within there that we can slot in. So I'm going to add some further styling onto my app. So I'm going to give it a background color. I'm going to give the font weight of the app as 500, a font size of 1.2 rem as opposed to pixels, just for responsive styling. So 1.2 rem, height of 100 view height, so it's within the viewport height. and I already have the margin as 0, and I'm going to give it a padding of 50 pixels all around, so that when we render out the to-do component, it will be centrally laid out on the page. So if I now go into my to-do component, I should now have the styled components installed. So if I import styled from styled components on my styles.js folder, I'm now going to create a container for this. So export const container, which is equal to styled.div. So now that I have the container, I am going to import it into the index.js file. So instead of the div, it's now going to be container, and I'm going to import this from import container from /styled. So in the same folder in the styles file. So now we have a background change color here, and then we also have padding across. What I also want to do is style the container. So if I go into my container, this is going to have a background of white. So we can differentiate between the outer container and the inner. So I save. And we're going to give this a color of a dark grayish kind of color. I've got the hex code here. And then I've also a border radius of 15 pixels all around for the container. And we are also going to have padding on the top and bottom of 20 pixels and the left and right of 30 pixels. Now if I save, we now have the to-do component styled out correctly. I also want to change the title on this. So in my container, I'm going to have a h2, and within the h2, I'm just going to give the title of list of to-dos. So this will be the title. So now we have the title here. Underneath, what we're going to do is I'm going to have a form component we will create, which will have the import and the submit button on there. We are also going to have the to-do list, which is also a component. We are also going to have a key component. So this will just say whether the to-do is completed or not completed. And just finally, an author component. So this will just say created by Imran Codes. So author component. But most of the functionality will be done within the form component and the to-do list component. So in the form component, we're going to create a to-do, and to-do list, we are going to fetch the to-do from the MongoDB database. Okay, so now that we have laid out the structure of the to-do component, what we're going to do is create the form component. So in my components folder, if I create a new folder called form, and again within there, a new file named index.js, rfce, this one will be named form, and we're going to create a corresponding styles.js file as well. Import styled from style components once again. So now we are going to create a form container. So export const form container, which is equal to styled.form, as it is a form. And also within component, we're going to have an input. So export const input, which is equal to styled.input. So again, here we are using semantic HTML tags. And the last one, export const button, which is equal to styled.button, like so. So now we have them set. We're just going to import them into the form file. So import the form container input and the button from same style file, like so. So now in here, the outer container will be the form container. We are also going to render out the input and also render out the button. So button, so now in the button, it will say add. And now if I save, and what I also need to do is import the form within the to-do component. So I'm going to render out the form component now. And if I control spacebar, I can now import the form from the relevant form folder. So now save. We now have an input and a button on there. So going back into my form index.js, I need a few things from here. So I need a value, which I will set to an empty string for now. We will also need an onChange, but I will leave that for now. I'm going to give it a type of text. This is a text input. And just finally, I'm also going to give it a role of input as also. So this will be for when we are getting the input itself, and we will add some testing to that with React testing library. So now that I have the values for the input, I also need to give the button a type of submit, so that when we click or press enter, then it will submit whatever's in the input field, and also an on-click event, but we will leave that for now. So what I'm going to do is style the form now. So if I go into the styles and the form, I'm going to give it a display of flex so that it is in a row, which it currently is. We are also going to align items center and also justify content as center. I'm also going to give it a padding of a top and bottom of 5 pixels and 0 pixels for the left and the right. And then for the import, I'm going to give this a background color, which I already have, a width of 100%, so take up as much as you can, padding of 8 pixels. It's also going to have a border as well, a border of 1px solid, and then the color will be a light grayish color. And again, to follow the styling of the outer component here, we're going to give it a border radius of 8 pixels all around. So now if I save, we should see a change. Yep, so we have. And when I click on there, the border itself changes color, so we want to style that also. So if I go into the focus, which is what it is, I want to give it the same border but enhance size to 3 pixels, and we also want to give it an outline of none. Now if I save and click on there, we have the border the same color as what it currently is, and then we also get the enhanced focus on there as well, so from 1 to 3 pixels, so that we know that we are in the input element. So to continue with this styling, I'm going to give the background color of the button the same color as the outline. So if I save, it is the same color as the outline. This is going to have a border radius of 18 pixels on the button. I'm going to copy the same border for the button, but it's going to be a 2 pixel solid button. The text inside is going to have a color of white, margin left of 1 em, just so that it has a bit of space in between the button and the input container, and also a padding of 8 pixels on the top and bottom, and then 20 pixels on the left and right. It will also have a cursor pointer, so that when we hover over it, we know that this is a clickable element. Finally, a font size of 0.8 rem and a font weight of 600, so it's slightly bolder. If I save, so now we have the button that when we hover over, it has the cursor, and we also have the input element. So on smaller screen sizes, we just need to style that so that the button drops underneath. So if I just copy what I already have, which is on the media queries of 420 pixels, we want to drop it from a row to a column. And then for the button, we are going to have a margin top on the button because it will drop underneath to the column, a margin left of 0 instead of 1 em, and we're going to give it a full width also. So if I save all, and then if we inspect, so as you can see, it drops and changes. So when we reach the breakpoint of 420, it drops to the column. So now that we have the styling done, it's time to add the functionality for the inputs, so that whatever is in the input field is going to now add to the MongoDB database. So at the moment, we now have the styling set up. but the functionality isn't there. So when I type in, nothing happens. We need to set a value for the input, and we also need to have a onChange method so that when we type in, it changes and it updates the value of the input. So going back up to the parent component, so the to-do component, in here, I'm going to have some state, and that is going to be const input and set input, like so, which is equal to useState, and the state is going to be an empty string, so that will mean it's empty, like so. And what I also want to do is I want to pass this down into the child component of the form. So input will equal input, like so, and set input is equal to set input. So these are props that are being passed down into the form component, so that when we go into the form component, we now have access to the updated changes on the input and set input. I also need to import useState from React, like so. So if I go into my form input now, I can now destructure what I'm getting back. So I will be getting the input that I passed from the to-do component, and also the set input, like so. So now instead of the input value being an empty string, it will be equal to the input. And I am also going to add a onChange method onto the input so that each time I type in it changes. So onChange, which is equal to a function of set input, and we want to get the value of the event within the input field. So we pass in the e as a parameter. So then within the set input, we now have access to the e dot target dot value. So now the input field is set. I'm now going to console log what the input is. So console.log input, just to see if everything is working correctly. So now if I inspect the page and go into my console tab, we have an empty input. So if I type into here, hello, each time, whenever the input component changes, we have an onChange event that updates the state of the input. So each character that I type in, as you can see, it updates the state of input. So if I now delete, it deletes each event that I make, so the value updates also. So now the functionality is working for the input. What we need to do is create the database, so the backend portion. The reason we are creating it in the backend is because we could be handling sensitive data, which could be accessed on the front end. So if we go into the elements, and on here, we can see the text. We want to handle the sensitive information in the backend. So that's what we will do next. Okay, so we're going to create the backend now so that we can create the database, and then when we add an input onto here, we create a post method so that when we press the add button, we have a post method that creates a new to-do, and then that would add onto the database. So if we go onto mongodb.com/atlas and click on try free for a new database, if you already have one, you can just log in, or you can sign up with Google. So because I already have one, I'm just going to create a database. So if we go on database on the left and then click build a database, there is a free plan which I will select and create, and leave all the settings as they are and create the cluster, like so. So this will take a couple of minutes to set up. So what I want to do now is, outside of the to-do front end, we are going to create a new folder. I'm going to call this one to-do backend. And I also want to create a new terminal for the backend. So if I go onto my new terminal and cd into to-do backend, I now want to initialize a new project within here. So if I type in npm init, I will get a series of questions. So the package name is to do backend, enter, the version is correct, the description is correct. The entry point will be server.js. Enter again, the Git repository, enter ignore, no keywords. You could put your name in here. So my name, Imran, in the author. Enter again. Is this okay? Yes. So now what will happen is in the backend, we will have a new file created. So the package.json file. And because the main file now will be the server.js, I now want to create that file. So server.js. And there are a few packages that I want to install also. So we are having a Node backend, and we are going to be using Express. So install npm I express mongoose, which will connect our backend to the database. We want to have cause and .env, which we will explain later on. So if I install all of them dependencies, and now if I go back onto my Mongo database, I now want to first off create a user. So this is going to be myself, Imran, and auto generate a secure password. I'm going to copy the password, which is very important, and then create the user. What I also want to do is we want to, on IP addresses, we want to add my current IP address. So now I have access in the database access. I want to also have network access. So this I am going to allow access from anywhere, which is not recommended, but it basically means that anyone can access this. So if I confirm, and then if I go into my database access, I have the user created here. And back in my database, I now want to click connect and connect your application. And the password that I copied, I want to paste that in. For now, I will just paste that in here. This is not recommended to share. I will delete this later once this application is complete. So please follow the steps and use your own. And now if I copy the string also, and then where it says password, we want to insert our own password inside. So password like so. So in my server.js file, there are a few things that I also need to import. So because Node.js uses all the syntax, we now are, instead of having the import like we do on the React front end like this, we are going to instead say const express. So this is the package that we added from npm is equal to require of express. I'm also going to have mongoose. So mongoose, which is equal to require of mongoose. I'm just going to copy this twice again, paste that in. So this one is going to be cause that will be lowercase, and then we are also going to have .env. And first off, I'm going to initialize the .env.config. I'm going to first off lay out what I'm going to do. So app config is going here. I also need the middlewares. So this is things like when we need to convert the data into JSON, and we also need the DB config. And finally, the API endpoints that we will have. So the create, read, update, and delete methods will go here. So API endpoints. So first off, we're going to initialize the app. So const app is equal to express. So we're initializing express. So that's our app. We're going to create a port. So const port, which is equal to process.env.port. So we do need to create an env file, which I will create in just a moment. So port is process.env.port, otherwise 8000 if the port's not there. So if I create a new file, .env, and in here I'm going to have a port of 8000 also. So now our server.js has access to the .env, which we initialized up here. So now if I save all, I now need to create a connection URL. So connection URL, which is equal to process.env.mongo_URI. So the URI is going to be this string here. So if I cut that out, go into my env file, and mongo underscore URI is equal to our connection, which we have here on the left. So if I close that down, so now we should have a connection onto the database. So now that I have defined the app config, I also need to add the middlewares on here. So I want to convert everything to JSON. So convert to JSON, which will be app.use. And within here, I'm going to pass in express.json, which converts everything for me as a middleware. And what I also need to add is to manage the headers. So app.use of cause. And if you want to know further about cause, if you just look at the package, so that's the middlewares complete. Now for my DB config, I'm going to connect to Mongoose. So mongoose.connect, and in here, I'm going to pass in the connection URL that I have passed. And then I am also going to have a .then method. So this will return a promise. And in here, in the .then, I'm going to pass in a callback, which will listen to the port. So app.listen. And what we are listening for is the port, which we have defined up here. So if I just copy that as the first argument, and then again a callback, which we will console log. And then we're going to have template literals so that we will have running on port, and then we will pass the port number in here. So port like so. So if all is well, we should see this message console log of running on port 8000, it should be. And we also want to handle errors, so .catch. And in here, I'm going to pass in an error. Again, callback. And within here, I'm just going to console.log whatever error is returned from here. So to test that the connection is working, I should expect to see running on port 8000. So if I run the backend, so node server.js, so I want to run the file within the backend folder called server.js. So this file will run, and then we will eventually make the connection to the MongoDB URL. And then once we've done that, we will have the console log of running on port, and it should be 8000 from the process env.port or the 8000. So if I press enter, we now have running on port 8000, and I have also got the local host set up as 8000. So now what we want to do is create the API endpoint. But before we do that, we are going to create a schema for the to-dos, which is basically a structure of how we want to send the to-dos to the back end, and how we also want to fetch the to-dos from the back end. So now we're going to create the schema or the structure of the back end. So if I close the front end folder, and in my back end, I'm going to create a new file, and I'm going to name it dbtodos.js. So this will be the structure or the schema, as they call it, of what I'm going to pass in my to-dos. So what I need to make the connection is mongoose. So const mongoose, which is equal to require mongoose. So, and I'm going to create a constant of to-do schema. So const to-do schema, which is equal to mongoose.schema. So, and in here, I'm going to have a couple of objects. So within the object, I'm going to have an object called text. So this is going to be the text that we create on the input. So whatever is in here, we want to pass into the database. So the text is going to have a type of string. So this will be a text, a string always. And we will also need this to be required. So required as true, put that in there. And what we're going to do is just copy this. Instead of text, I'm going to have a Boolean value of completed. So has the to-do been completed? So this will be a Boolean of true. So we'll have just two objects in the schema. So the text and completed. And just finally, we also want to have timestamps in there so that we can order it or sort it by the date. So an object again of timestamp. with an S of true. So this will add to the database also. So now we have created the to-do schema. We now also need to export it. So normally we would do the export default, but because it is in Node.js and an older backend environment, we are going to do it the older way. So module.export, which is equal to mongoose.model. And I'm going to name this model to-dos as the first argument, and then the second argument is the model we're going to pass across, which is the to-do schema, like so. So now if I save, we have that set up. So what I also am going to do is create a controller. So this will handle all of the API endpoints as the second argument. So now that I have created my to-do schema, I'm going to create all the CRUD methods using this schema. So I'm going to create a new folder in the backend. This will be called controllers, like so. And within controllers, I'm going to create a new file named to-do controller.js. So now if I go into my server.js file, I now want to create my endpoint. So first endpoint will be get to-dos list. I will have also the create a new to-do. We will also have the update a to-do. And just finally, we will have delete a to-do, like so. So in here, the first one is going to be app.get, and the endpoint that we want to get is /todos, like so. And then in my controller file, the second argument is normally a callback function, which we will create in the controller file just to make the server.js file lightweight and neat. So what I will call this callback function is get to-dos, like so, and we will import this from the to-do controller.js file. So if I just copy this and paste this in each time, so instead of app.get this time, so to create a new to-do, we will do app.post, and we will post the to-dos to the /todos endpoint, and the callback argument will be create to-do with one S, like so. We also want to update an individual and delete an individual to-do, so the endpoints will be /:id. So we want to essentially get the ID that we click on, and we want to delete that from the entire to-dos list. So this will be app.put, and I'm going to name this one update to-do with singular to-do, and the same with this one will be app.delete, which will also be named delete to-do, like so. So at the top, after the .env config, I also want to import these methods. So if I import these, which is equal to require of ./controllers/to-do controller.js. So essentially, we're going to export these methods here from the to-do controller.js and import them into the API endpoints as a callback function. So I'm just going to copy these across. So get to-dos, create to-do, update to-do, and finally delete to-do. So now we have the server.js file complete. All we need to do now is create these callback functions in the to-do controller, and then that will be the backend portion of the app complete. So if I go into to-do controller.js, and in here we need two packages. So we need mongoose once again. Mongoose equals require mongoose. And we also need the schema that we created. So const to-dos, I'm going to name this one, which is equal to require of the go up a level into db to-dos. So now we have access to the schema portion. I'm just going to paste in the names of what we are going to create here. And whilst we're at it, I'm going to export these. So module.export is equal to an object, which will take in the following functions. And now we just need to create the function. So first off, the callback function that I want to create is get the to-dos list. So I'm going to name this const of get to-dos, which is what we named it in this file and the server.js file. So I want to get the to-dos, so I'm going to give it an async function. So in this function you get a request and a response, and I'm going to give it a callback, and within the async function I'm going to give it a try catch block. So a try and then a catch, like so. And what I want to do is create the to-dos, so const all to-dos, or get the all of the to-dos, which is equal to await to-dos dot find. So this is a method from MongoDB to find all of the to-dos. So await to-dos dot find, which is equal to an empty object. So find all of the to-dos, and we also want to sort these with the newest going to the top. So sort, and in here I'm going to get an object. So within the to-do schema, so if I go into here where we have selected timestamps of true, what gets added onto here is something called created at, and we want to get the created at as -1 so that the new to-dos are there always at the top. So now that we have the to-dos, all to-dos declared, I want to get a res.status of 200, res.status of 200, which means it's a success, dot send. And what we want to send is all of the to-dos. So that way we have access to all of the to-dos. And in the catch block, I forgot to put the error in. So when we have an error, essentially what we want to do is the same thing, but instead we give it a 400 error, and we want to pass in the error dot message. So now if I save, I now have the get to do list set up. So now we can access the get to dos. We just need to copy this and underneath paste, but this time we want to create a new to do, and the method is going to be called create to do. We get a request and a response once again. So now we want to get the to do that we are passing across. So const db to do. So within the request we get access to the body. So we want to pass in the new to do into the database. So within the try catch block, I'm going to name this one new to do, which is equal to await to-dos dot create, and in here I'm going to pass in the db to do. So essentially we are creating whatever gets passed in from request.body into the new to do, and then what we are again going to do is pass in a 2 or 1 this time to say we have successfully created a new to do. And for the error, I'm just going to change this to a 500 error so that we have got a to do and created a to do also. So now all that's left is to create the update to do and the delete to do. So I'm just going to again copy this, but the update and delete are slightly different. So I'm just going to change this to update to do, and I'm going to give it a constant of update to do, like so. But to find the right to do, we need to get access to the individual ID that we click on. So on here, we're going to get access to the params object within request. So request.params.id, but I'm just going to destructure the ID from request.params. So within the request params, we're going to get the ID that get passed in. So if we go back into our server, we get an ID parameter here within the request.params. So this ID within the try block, I'm going to check first of all if it is a valid ID. So and then this is where we have access to mongoose.types.object ID dot is valid. So basically what this does is it checks if the destructured ID is valid. So what we want to do is check if it's not valid, so just give it an exclamation mark beforehand. If it's not valid, then we want to return a response.status of of 404.send. So we want to send the response of 404, and this will say there is no to do with the ID of, and then just pass in the ID here and give this some template literal backticks. Okay, and then just fix this and just close it off here. And if that check passes, then we want to update the to-do. So what I want to do is essentially check the ID is valid, like so. Okay, and then once the ID is valid, we want to get access to the to-do ID. So to-do ID, which is equal to underscore ID of ID. So the underscore ID is from MongoDB. That's how they name their IDs. So that's the structure it always is for each individual ID that we have. And then the ID that we have is going to be equal to the rec.params.id here. So once we find that, we want to update. So const update is equal to, if we look into our DB to-dos, we want completed to become true. Initially, it will be false because we haven't completed the to-do. So we want to access the completed key here, and we want to now set that to true. Now we have declared both variables that we need. I want to change this to these both to update to do, like so. And instead of todos.create, we want to do todos.find, find one, and update, which is this method here. And what we want to pass in as the first argument is the to-do ID. So we want to find the to-do ID from the params object, and then the payload that we want to update with is the update. So we want to toggle complete to true, like so. Then what we want to do is do an extra check. So if there isn't an update to do, then we want to return the same check here as well. So res.status of 404, no such, there's no to do with the ID of the ID. Otherwise, we want to send res.status of 200, like so. Again, passing in the update to do. And just finally, the last method is the delete to do. So if I change the update to actually all of them to delete, let's do it one by one. So delete to do, and that's a lowercase d. Again, we are getting access to the ID from the params. We are going to check if this is a valid ID. I don't need the updates. We don't need these anymore. So if we just delete them, and we want to declare a delete to do. So instead of find one and update, this will be find one and delete. So, and the one that we want to find and delete is within the object of underscore ID equal to the ID that we pass. So that's what we want to delete. And we don't need the if check here. We just need to pass in the deleted to do as a 200 status here, and then we've passed in the deleted to do. So now if we save all, we have the backend all set up and complete. So we have the schema set up, we have the server.js file which has the API endpoint set up, and we have the connection to the MongoDB database with Mongoose, and we have set everything up as we need. What we now need to do is on the front end make API requests to the local host of 8000 and build out the rest of the front end. Okay, so now that we've created the backend, so I'll just close everything off there. We now need to make a connection and fetch the data from the database. So I'm going to use a package for this, which is going to be Axios. So on the front end, I'm just going to install npm i Axios. And whilst that's installing, in my source folder on the front end, I'm going to create a file and I'm going to name this axios.js. So essentially we need to create an instance for Axios, The benefits of Axios is that it converts all the data into JSON itself, and it manages the headers, and there's many more benefits that you can read up on the npm docs for this. So in my Axios JS file, I'm going to import. So we're back to the ES6 way of importing because we're on the front end. It's going to be import Axios from the package Axios, like so. And I'm going to create an instance. So const instance, which is equal to axios.create, and we're going to create an object of base URL. So this is the URL that we are going to be fetching the data from. So this will be localhost/8000. The reason for this is because when we was defining the port on the backend, so in server.js, we have a port of 8000 or the port in the env file. So that is the reason we're going to create the string of HTTP of localhost 8000. And I'm just going to now is we need to create an object. So we need parentheses around here. So HTTP localhost 8000, and then all we need to do is export default of the instance, like so. Now if I save, I now have the access to the base URL, which will be the localhost/8000. So if I close this off now, and at the top level, so in the to-do component, I'm now going to create a function, and I'm going to fetch all the data from the DB. So this function is going to be called fetch data, and this is going to be an async function. So async function, an arrow function, and within here I'm going to have a try catch block once again, and in here we have the error and console.log the error.message. So it's just I prefer the try catch way, because in the catch block you can handle errors that way, and then everything else is in the try block. So I'm going to create a response. So const response is equal to await, and then axios.get, and this is going to be /todos. So we're going to get everything from the /todos endpoint. And I also need to create some state for the to-dos. So const to-dos and set to-dos, which is equal to useState of an empty array. So essentially what we want to do is get all of the to-dos in an array format. So then what we can do is in the to-do list, we can map everything out onto the page using ES6 map method. So now we have the to-dos set, and now also need to import Axios from the Axios.js file that I created, because it has the base URL instance in there. So if I just import Axios from, this is important because you don't want to import it from the package Axios, as we've already imported that in our Axios.js file. So up a level and then up another level into Axios. So now we have access to axios.get here, and we want to get all of the to-dos. So that will be localhost 8000 /todos, like so. As you can see, we have to-dos in there. There's an array in there, and there's a response. So all I want to do now is the to-dos that we have created as the state. I'm just going to copy this and set the to-dos as response.data, like so. And now if I save, I now have the fetch data working correctly. So all I now need to do is run the function. So we want to run the function on the first render of the page. So if I inspect and go into my console and just refresh the page, instead of console logging the input now, I'm just going to copy this, and we want to console log the to-dos. So there is a further step we need to do to run this function. So if I save, we now have two empty to-dos, which is essentially the initial state here, so an empty array. Now what we want to do is get a use effect hook, and within this use effect it has a callback function, and in here we want to fetch the data, like so. And if I save, what will happen is it will fetch the data, but we want to fetch it on the first render. So if you pass in an empty dependency array like so, it will only fetch when we refresh the page. So on the first mount, like so. And if we save, and refresh, we have the to-dos now set up. If I go into my networks tab, and now can see we have fetched the to-dos. So on the to-dos, we are passing a request method of get, which is equal to a 200 status. Same here again. And the response is an empty array. This is because we don't have anything in the database yet. So what we need to do is we need to add some to-dos to the database. And now we need to create a new function called add to-do, which is equal to async, like so. And in here, we're just going to, for now, console log added to do. Okay. So now that we've created the add to do function, what I'm going to do is pass it in to the form component. So add to do is equal to add to do. And then if I go into my form component and paste that in, we now have access to the add to do. So on submit on the button, so whenever we submit, we're going to run an anonymous function which runs the add to do, like so. And what we also want to do is pass in the event. So when we submit, we want to prevent the default behavior for a form. So if I save add to do, pass in the event and go back into the add to do function over here, we now have access to the event. I want to e.prevent default, which default prevents the default behavior, so prevents the screen refreshing. And now if I save, okay, and if I type in hello and go into my console, now if I press add, sorry, we just need to change this to on click, and now save and click. So each time we click now, we have added to do logging on the console. So all we need to do now is in this function, add the to do to the database. So we need to pass the input value in here to the MongoDB database. So in our function, first off, what we need to do is add what is called a guard clause. So basically, when we click on the button or submit the button, we don't want to submit any data because there's nothing inside of the input when it is empty. So the best way to access that is in an if block. So if the input dot length is equal to 0, then what we want to do is return null. So don't do anything. So what we are doing is coding defensively. We are saying that if there is nothing in the input, then we cannot submit, essentially. And then if the length is greater than 0, what we want to do here is we want to await and we want to get axios.post. So we essentially want to post the data in the input to the /todos endpoint. So axios.post /todos as the first argument. So that's where we are passing the data to. And then as the second argument, I'm just going to create an array. And in here is going to be an object. And first off, if there are any other to-dos, we want to spread them. So we want to add the existing to-dos into the body. And then we want to add in the new to-do. So this is essentially, if we didn't spread the data in, what will happen is it will constantly overwrite the database. So we don't want to do that. And then the text. So if we go into our schema, so on our to-dos here, we have a text field and a completed field. So what we want to do is the text is going to be the input, so the state of the input. So when we type, we have the state of the input here, and we also want to pass in completed, which is a Boolean value, and this is always going to be false unless we update and set it to true, because we are adding to the to-do list. So we are posting to the /todos endpoint, and then we are getting the existing to-dos, spreading them in, we're not overwriting them, and then we are adding to the text field the input, so whatever is in the input, and we're going to set the completed to false. What we also want to do is set input to empty now, because we have passed the data in, so it will be empty. And we also want to fetch the data once again, because we've added to the database. So fetch the data again, and then that should mean the to-do has successfully been added. So if I now save, refresh the page, and then I'm just going to type in, this is my first to-do, and add. So now in the to-dos array at the top here, we have fetched the data from the slash to-dos endpoint. We have added the to-do of text input. So that was the input that we typed in and completed as false. So if we expand this, we have an object within the array. So the timestamps are created with the text, this is my first to do with completed of false. So that has worked correctly. So what we need to do now is we need to take these console logs out first of all, out as well. Now what essentially we need to do is display the to-dos as a list on the screen. So we need to create this to-do list component now. So now we need to create the to-do list component. So if I go into my components folder and create a new folder called to-dos or to-do list, and same structure again, index.js, and we also want to create a styles folder, styles file should I say, sorry, styles.js, and then rfce, this will be called to-do list. And in the to-do list, I'm going to have some bullet points. So I'm going to create a UL. I'm going to call this one list container, capital L container. And within here, I'm going to render out all of my to-dos in bullet points. So render all to-dos in bullet points underneath. So now if I create the UL, so import styled from style components, export const the list container, which is equal to styled.ul, which is unordered list. And this UL is going to have a padding of 0 and a cursor pointer, and that's all we're going to have for this. And then I'm going to create a row, so export const of row, which is equal to styled.li, so the bullet points within. And in this li, we're going to give it a display of flex, align the items centrally, and we are going to justify content as space between, because we are going to have the delete icon on the far right and then the text on the left, so we just want to space them out equally. We're going to have a padding of top and bottom for each li of 8 pixels, and then 0 on the left and the right, and then the font size will be 1 rem, so 1 rem like so, and that's the row complete. We are also going to have a text field, so export const. So this is where the li will render the text. So export const of text, which is equal to styled.span. So the text here, essentially what I want to do with the span is I want to capitalize the first letters because it might not be capitalized. So this is a handy trick. So text transform capitalize. So essentially the first letter of the span will be capitalized. So I think that should be okay. And now we need to render out the row and the text. So if I go onto my to-do list, in here I also want to get access to my to-dos. I want to map over them. So in my to-do file, in the component, I have access to the to-dos. So now I want to render the to-do list and pass down the to-dos, which are equal to to-do, as props. So I have essentially fetched the data, fetch the data here, and then set the to-dos to response.data. So the to-dos I am now passing down as props into the to-do list, which I will now have access to. So if I console log the to-dos in here, so to-dos, and then I'm just going to put a comment of hi, and I am also going to comment, or I'm going to delete the to-do here because we don't need access to the to-dos array there now. So now I'm getting access to the to-dos once again in the to-do list component. So all I now need to do is map it onto the page. So if I scroll right, enter again. So I have the to-dos and we want to ensure they're there. So first off, I could do optional chaining like this, dot map, which basically means if to-dos is there, then we want to map the data across. So for each to-do, we want to implicitly return. So implicitly is like so, where we don't need to define the return, so we don't need to type in return and then like so. We can just implicitly return everything. And if so, for each to do, we now want to render a row. So what we defined in the styles.js file. And within this row, I'm going to give it a key first of all. So the key for the to do will be to do dot underscore ID, because that is what is on the what is returned from the API, as you can see here, a unique element that we want to identify per row. So each object within the array will have an underscore ID property on there. So we also need to import the row from the styles. So now we have that. We also want to render the text. So if we also import that from the styles, like so. And in the text, we are going to have to do dot text, like so. And now if I save, we now have the text rendering on the page. If I was to add a second to do, so second to do, this will also add on to the page like so. So I also want a close icon. So all I'm going to do is render another text tag here, and inside is going to be a capital X. So if I now save, we now have the close icon also. So there are two things I want to do now. Is I want to create an update to do, so that when we click on this text element, then we will update the to do on the API, and then when we click this one, we close the to do. So to differentiate it, I'm just going to name this one close icon or delete icon, and then all I'm going to do in this styles file is export const of delete icon, which is equal to styled, and then all we want to do is just copy the text. So you can do it this way, like so. And now if I save, it's essentially the same styling. So now that is complete, I'm going to create the update to do method and the delete to do method. So we'll just do them in the same file. So first off, I'm going to create the update to do, which is equal to async. And this time we will need to take a parameter in. The parameter that we pass in, when we click on the text, we want to have an onClick method. So the onClick method will return an anonymous function calling the update to do that we have passed in. And we are going to pass in the to do dot underscore ID. So essentially what we are doing is we are passing in the ID that we want to update. And in here, the argument or the parameter passed in will be the ID. So all we need to do now, same thing again, try catch block within here. So catch the error, which we will console log. In this case now, I will do console.error, which is equal to error.message, like so. And then I also need to import the instance from Axios. So import Axios from the file that we created, Axios, this one, so that within the try block we want to create a response which is equal to await axios.put, and this will take two arguments. The first argument will be the endpoint, so that will be slash to-dos slash the ID that is passed in. So we are using template literal here to pass in the slash to-do slash ID, which is this ID will be now passed to the request.params on the URL. The second argument will be the payload, and what we essentially are going to pass in is the ID because the backend handles everything for us. So now that we have our response, all I want to do now is return response or data.json. And what I'm also going to do is, because we are updating the to-do, we need to refetch the data again. So I will get access to the fetch data function from the parent component. So fetch data here. We will fetch the data again. So fetch data is now getting passed in as a prop, like so. You could do it in other ways. You could have a state management tool like Redux and then update the state that way. But to keep it simple, I'm just going to pass it in as a prop. So now if I save everything across and save all, I now have the update to do function. And now if I click on this is my first to do and click on it, this is my first to do, and the completed has changed to true instead of false. So all we need to do now is mirror this on the screen visually. So I'm going to pass in a prop to the text component. So what I will do is open this up a little bit and then enter, make this look a bit neater. Okay, so the prop I'm going to pass in is called is completed, is equal to the completed key here. So we're going to map through the to-dos for each to-do. If it is completed, it's going to be to-do dot completed. So if the to-do is equal to true, so if completed is equal to true, then we want to style it in a different way. So the shorthand method for this is we could just take this out because to-do.completed is now true anyway. If we wanted to check if is completed is false, then we could do is completed is false. So because we're passing to-do.completed is only going to pass the is completed prop down to the styled component when it is only true. So if I now go into my styles on my text, I'm going to add a color, and here we are going to access the props being passed in. So props and props dot is completed. If the props dot is completed is true, we want the color to be red. Otherwise, we don't want to do anything. So no, like so. Now if I save, so now the one that is true has turned to red. We also want the text to be underlined. So what I'm going to do is just copy this across and paste in the text decoration to be lined through if the is completed is true also. So now if I save, we now have the if it is completed, we now have that crossed out. So now that the update function is working correctly, the last CRUD method to do is the delete. So it's essentially the same function. So if we copy this and paste it underneath, the update needs to change to delete. And again, we are using the same endpoint. We are using the slash to do slash ID. Instead of .put, this will be delete. We are passing in the ID, the same as the update method. We again fetching the data and then returning the new response. So all I need to do is just copy the on click here and pass it into the delete icon. We are passing in the ID, but all we need to do now is change the function to the delete function like so. And on my delete icon, I also want to add a cursor pointer onto this, so we know it's a clickable element. Now if I save, so we have the update click working and the delete click working. So if we test out the delete click, so inspect and refresh the page, we should have all the functionality working. So on my network tab, first functionality is getting the data. So the second one will be creating the data. This is my third post, and now if I press enter, it adds it onto the list here with the payload. So we are posting the data 201 response created with this is my third post text, which is correct, and then we are refetching the data once again. If I was to click on this is my third post, we now pass in the payload of the ID, which then updates the completed to true. And then the last one is if I delete this is my first to do and click, we delete. So we delete the method and then we refetch the data also. So on the back end, so if I go into my /todos API, I should only see this is my third post and the second to do on here. So if I refresh, we have an array of two objects, one which is true, so completed should have a line through it. On this is my third post, which it does, and then on the second to do, this is not completed, so it doesn't have a line through, which is mirrored on the backend also. So now that we have the functionality working correctly and the page rendering the relevant to-dos on there, all we need to do now is create a key component and a author component. So the next component to create is the key component. So we have the functionality working on the front end and the back end. It's just the finishing touches now. So I'm going to go into my components folder, create a new folder named key. So, and index.js in here, and also a styled file as also. Import the styled component, rfce, and this will be called key. And I'm going to name this key container, which will be a UL. And within the key container, I want to create two bullet points. I'll just name them bullet point, which will be not completed. And I'm also going to give this a role equal to list item. This will be because we will access this when we add our React testing library tests in. So this first row will be list. And then all we want to do is copy the bullet point once again and then paste that in underneath. And this one will be called completed. Now all we need to do is create the styles for these style components. So import key container from the styles, and we also want to import the bullet point from /styles. Save everything. So now all we want to do is create the key container, export const bullet point, which is equal to styled.li, and we also want to create the key container, which is styled.ul. So the UL is going to have a display of flex, putting it into a row, aligning the items centrally, and we want to justify content as space evenly. And I also want to render this out in here so we can see what's going on. So I want to render out the key component. And now if I save, we have not completed and completed. Okay, so space evenly, we want to give them a font size of 0.8 rem. So, and a list style type. So essentially we want to change the bullet point to a square. Quite a few here that we could choose, but I'm just going to choose square for this one. A border padding and a border radius, which I will just paste in. So the border is the same red as the one above. A padding of 5 pixels and a border radius to keep everything consistent with the app of 8 pixels also. And then for smaller screen sizes, we just want to have a flex direction of column on there. So if I now save, so if we scroll and inspect, this will now go into a column like so. So all that's left is to style the actual bullet points themselves, so the LIs. So what I want to do is access the last child, so the second one in this case. I'm going to give the completed a color of red to say that when it is completed, it's going to be red. And then again, we're going to add some extra padding when it is a smaller screen size, just on the top and bottom. So if I paste the padding on the top and bottom here and save, we have a bit more space on there. So that's the key component done. All that's left is the author component. So I will first of all clear all my files out, and then in the to-do component, I'm just going to render out the author, and we need to create the author. So if I go into components, new folder named author, and then a new file of index.js or fce, and this is going to be named the author component. Author component like so. The outer div is going to be named author container, and then we just need to create a styles file for this. So import author container from /styles, so, and then the text in here is going to be created by, then you could just put your own names in there, and I'm going to put an a tag in, ahref of, just going to copy what I already have, so an ahref of mern-code.com, that opens up into a new tab. And then in the author, I'm going to create a styles.js file as well. Import styles from style components, and in this author container, export const author container, which is equal to style.span. You could also do style.footer if you wanted it as a footer, but because it's a reusable component, the to-do component, I just want to put it in a span. And all that needs to be added in here is the font size of 0.6 rem, and the a tag is going to have a cursor pointer on there. So now if I save everything, we just need to import the author in the to-do.js, and I'm going to delete my comments now because we don't need them, because we have completed the app. Now if I save everything, we now have a fully functioning to-do app. This is now complete. If I press enter, onto the top as it's sorted by the timestamp. So the last thing to do now is add in my Jest test, and this is helpful because it will catch any bugs on the application if there was any. Because I've created smaller modular components, it is now easier to test. So now everything is complete and the to-do app is working. So in most professional environments, doing this wouldn't be enough. We would need to add some tests onto there just to see if the components are functioning and working as they are supposed to. So what we are going to do is create some tests for each of our components. First off, I'm going to go on to the author component and create a new folder in here and name it _tests so we can differentiate it. And then in here, I'm going to name the file author.test.js. So when it's a test file, we just add the .test after the component name. That should work correctly. And then what I want to do is in my terminal, I want to do npm test and press enter. So now we are in running tests and we have found a test file that's already failing. So if I go into my app.test.js, here we have a link element. So what we are doing essentially is we are rendering the app component, and then on here we are getting the text learn React, which is what is installed when we install npx create React app. So the text learn React, it renders that and expects it to be in the document. So at the minute it's not in the document. So what I'm going to do is, if I go into app.js, I have this text named welcome to the to-do app at the top. So all I'm going to do is get that text and paste that in. So this means that the slash welcome to the to-do app slash I means case insensitive. So it could be upper and lower case. It doesn't really matter. It will render the app component correctly. So this is the test name correctly. And this time we expect the element to be in the document, but I'm just going to name this title, like so. Now if I save, we have one passed test, which is this one here, and one failed test, which will be in the author test.js file, which we have just created. So I'm just going to copy this and paste this in here and close this one off and the app one off. So instead of rendering the app now, we need to render the author component. So import author from ... like so, or you could do ... slash index. And then we want to render the author component like so. This is nice and easy, this one. So it renders author component correctly. The reason it is easy is because we are not passing any props down and we are just testing the text on here. So what we want to do is I'm going to check for the website link to make sure that's working correctly. So instead of title, I'm going to name this one website link. So we are going to look at the screen. So we have access to a screen and we are going to get by text, and the text we are going to get is imrun codes. But another hack that I use is screen.debug, which renders what is showing up on the app or what Jest and React testing library are seeing. So because I have done screen.debug, I now have what is rendering from this author component here. So now all I want to do is test the website link. So if I get by text imrun code, like so, paste that in here, I now have access to the website link. I want to expect website link to be in the document. So if I save, this test has now passed. I also want to check that the href is correct also. So now what I want to do is I want to expect that the website link, so there's a lot of methods that we can pass on Jest and React testing library. So essentially we want to test that it has to have attribute, and we want to check the href on this as the first argument, and then we want to pass in the URL that is being passed, so this one. So expect the website link to have the attribute of the href as imrancodes.com. If I now save, the test will run. So that's passed. If I was to remove a character and then run it, it would fail. It's here, it says expected element to have attribute HTTP, but it received the imran code with an A. So if I just add the A on to here, now save, like so. And then the final thing I want to add is expect the website link dot to have style, and this will have the style of cursor pointer, because we added that style in onto the A tag. Now if I save, this should also pass, which is correct. So now the author component is rendering correctly. All we need to do is add further tests for the form. So new folder underscore test underscore enter new file here. So this one will be form.test.js. And then if I just paste in what I already have, and I'm going to change these to form. So it's going up a level into the index, like so. Close this off. And now with the form, I have an input, a set input, and an add to do. So this is where we need to pass down the props. So form. So to pass down props, all you do is pass them in like so. And first off, the input that I'm going to pass is going to be equal to an empty string. So essentially what we are doing is mimicking what we would normally pass down into the component. So set input is going to be equal, and I'll just put it up here. I'm going to create some variables. So const set input prop, which is equal to jest.fn. So essentially this is just mimicking a function with Jest, and we're going to do the same for the add to do. So add to do prop. So set input is equal to set input prop, and then the add to do is going to be equal to the add to do prop. So, and if I save, and I also want to screen.debug here because website link is not within this component, but we do have an add button. So what I want to test is I want to test if the input has a correct initial value. So essentially it should be empty. So now I'm going to get the input. So const input is equal to screen.getBy, and you have a lot of options here to choose from, and I'm going to choose get by role because we defined that earlier. So the input role is input. So screen.getBy role of input, like so. So now we have access to the input. So now what do I expect from this input? So expect the input dot value. So expect the input value to be an empty string. So if I save that, it is an empty string. So as you can see, because you're rendering the form component here, it is an empty string. And all we want to do is copy this, paste this in, and change the value to hello. And now this test will fail because the input value is not hello, it is an empty string. So all we want to do to check if it shouldn't be this is add a dot not in there. So now we have tested the input field. We also want to do the same for the button. So button works correctly, and this is what we are going to do first off is access the button. So const button or btn is equal to screen.getByText this time because we can get it by the add text. Screen.getByText of case sensitive again, so add, and then all we want to check for is expect the btn to be in the document. So now we have 3 tests passing. Now these are very basic tests. We could go into them further. So we could render more tests in here and pass different inputs and expect the inputs to be correct. We could test the functionality of the button when we click it also, but we're just going to keep it simple for now. So if I go into the key folder and I'm going to create an underscore test underscore again, and in here I'm going to create key.test.js and paste in here what I've copied from the previous, again changing the form to key, and then the key we want to go in here, and we don't have any props being passed in, but we do have roles, so we will access the roles when selecting. So I will delete the props here, and we don't need this also. Renders the key correctly. So now what we want to do is create 3 tests in here. So there should be two bullet points here. We also want to not completed to be in the document. We want the completed to be in the document. And there should be only one bullet point group. So now what I want to do is get the bullet points. So const bullet points is equal to screen dot get all by role. So we want to access all of the roles, and that is list. Or this could be get by role because there's only one list item, so one UL. We also want to get the list item, so const not completed is equal to screen dot get all by role, this time by role because there is two list items. So this one is list item, and we are going to access the first index of this, so the 0 index, and then the completed is same list item, but this time we are accessing the first index of the item. So we have selected everything now, so not completed to be in the document. So this is quite simple. We need to expect and get not completed dot to be in the document, and then same again for the completed, so completed to be in the document. And if I delete them, as we don't need them ones anymore, and because completed is going to have a style on there, I'm just going to expect completed because it is red, so expect completed to have style, and that will be the color of red. If I save, this test should pass. Okay, and I'm going to quickly screen.debug so I can see what else I can test for the bullet points. So we can test for the bullet points length, so expect bullet points dot length to be 1 because there's one UL, so dot length to be 1, and that should pass. Now if we just check why that's failed, it's undefined. So what we need to do is we need to change this to get all by role, and now if I save, it is now passed. And just an extra check on there, it shouldn't be dot not to be 2. And now if I save that, that is passed as well. Okay, so now we need to create a test for the to-do component, and we'll keep this one quite simple. It's just going to test for the title to see if that's rendering, so this component here. So create a new folder, underscore, double underscore tests, enter, and then so I'll just copy this across. New file, this is to-do.test.js, and paste it in. We want to change this to to-do, renders the to-do component correctly, and all we want to do is ensure that the title displays correctly. So title displays correctly. So first off, I'm just going to screen.debug, and the best way to access the title would be const title is equal to screen dot get by text, again case sensitive, so // of the list of to-dos. Copy that across and save. So we are getting the entire application rendering, but I just want to test the H2 element, as the other elements that are getting rendered across are getting tested within their own individual components. So now all I want to do is expect the title, first of all, to be in the document, which it will be because we can see it getting rendered on the console here at the bottom over here. And then we also want the title to have a style, and if you're unsure on the style that it has, all I would do is inspect on the document what the style it has for the H2. So here, H2, we can see it has a font weight bold, so I'm just going to copy that just to see if it actually renders the font weight as bold. So now if I save, this test should pass, which it has done. So all I'm going to do is copy this, and then the final component to test, which is we're going to have a bit more functionality on the test, is the to-do list. So if I create a new folder, underscore tests, and then this one will be named to-do list.test.js. So, and I'm just going to paste this in what I already have. So to-do list. So we are rendering the to-do list component, and now I'm going to save all. We have a failed test here. So this component, it takes in some data. So we are passing in the to-do's data into this component. So we need to mock the to-do's data. So what I'm going to do here, I already have created a mock response. So this is the response that's going to be passed in. The prop, so to-do's, is equal to the to-do's data. So this is a different response. So we have get the shopping, which is set as completed true, and do the washing, which is set as completed false. We also get the fetch data, which is a function. So that is going to be equal to a function. So I'm just going to call it jest.fn, which is a mocked response for a function. So there are a few things that I want to mock on here. So first one is close icon, which is what I want to test. I also want to test the first to do, and I also want to test the second to do, because they will have different visuals on them, because completed is false on one and completed is true on the other. So the close icon, I want to get access to the close icon. So what I'm going to do is give this a test ID. So delete icon, and the documentation for this is in React testing library. So React testing library. So if we go in here, we have access to all methods. So on here, I want to test ID or get by. So if I go on here, they have a cheat sheet on here where we can see what is the best approach. And as you can see here, it's not recommended to use test ID. It should be used as a last resort, but I'm just showing you how to use it. So if we go on to delete icon, and data test ID is equal to close, I'll just call it close, like so. So now, if I do const close icon is equal to green dot get by test ID, and because we've set it as close, so we now have access to the test ID. And if I now save, what I now expect is the close icon to be in the document first of all. So expect the close icon to be in the document. So if I now save, we should get an error, which we do. So the error is because there are multiple test IDs of close in there, because we are rendering two to-dos. So all I want to do is either use the first index, and that will only get the first index, but here it says if we use all by, so if I just use all by instead, so now the close icon should be in the document. So now we have an array of two data test IDs. Now we get the access to the first index of all by, which is correct. So close icon, or this could be named as first close icon. So it makes more sense that way. And then I want expect first close icon to have style. And if I go back into my app, this icon here, the span, should have the style of cursor pointer. Now if I save, that should pass because we have that style on there. I also want to access the first to do. So const first to do equal to screen dot get by text of the first one says get the shopping. So I'm just going to get it by text here. And I'm going to access the second to do as well. And this one is do the washing. So we need to test the first one first of all. So I always do the to be in the document test. So first to do should be in the document, and then also the second to do should be in the document, and then the style. So you can go into more depth, but I just want to keep it quite simple for this video. So Again, second to do should have a certain style. So because one's completed and one's not, they should have different styles. So the conditional render on here, so if it is completed, it should have red, and text decoration should have a line through. So that's what we want to test. If I go into here, and then the color should be red for the first to do, I think, because completed is true. So yep, that's right. So color is red, and then also the text decoration should have a line through because it is true. So all I want to do is copy this for the second to do, just to see if the test fails, which it should do because expected color red on the second to do. So if I just comment that out and then just run the test, it should pass because the first one is completed true. So all I need to do now is these tests here. So the second one, because the completed is false, we now just need to put the .not in there. And now if I save, all of the tests are now passed. So that means our application is all complete. I'm just going to remove the screen.debug in there and renders to do this correctly. So each component within our app now has a test in there along with the app.js file. So if I now save everything, and if we test the app, we have an app here and an API backend with 3 to-dos on there, which are correctly rendered on the page. If I was to delete a to-do, the second to-do, it is now gone. And if I refresh that, the second to-do is gone. If I was to add a to-do, so added new to-do and enter, it has now added and added to the top of the page. And if I refresh my API, it's also added there. If I was to click this is complete, it would have a line through to say it is completed. And again, this would change to true now if I refreshed. And also we are mapping through each to do on the API and we are rendering it onto the page. If you can please like and subscribe my video, that would be really appreciated. And I hope this video has helped you a lot.